I thought I had it all. A loving wife, a stable job, a life worth living. But one phone call shattered everything. I heard his voice, the man I trusted, telling my wife what he was going to do to her in our bed. My blood boiled. I followed her that night, and what I saw made my world collapse. She claimed she had no choice, but I knew better. I didn't just want justice, I wanted revenge, and when I was done, they were left with nothing. This is how I took back my life and destroyed theirs. My name is Mike Adams, and my psychiatrist suggested that I keep this journal to help me process my thoughts and feelings. I just went through a difficult divorce, and it was hard to cope with everything happening around me. The doctor explained that sharing my story would help me understand my feelings better. Writing in this journal became a part of my daily routine. To start, I feel like just another number in the sad statistics about divorce. I found out my wife, Carrie, had been unfaithful, and now we are divorced. It's hard to accept that her connection with my boss, Justin, was manipulative. But that didn't change how I felt. The image of their companionship lingered in my mind. Apparently, Justin had taken advantage of a social gathering where Carrie had been drinking and made a terrible choice. He used that moment to pressure her into actions she wasn't comfortable with. In my anger, I reacted poorly and ended up confronting him, which led to my arrest. Luckily, my brother Tom is a great lawyer. He managed to convince the court that I wasn't in my right mind, so they let me go. After that, Justin tried to pursue legal action against me. When the jury heard everything, they decided in my favor, though the judge told them they couldn't award me money. Taking the hint, I decided to take action against him. This time, the jury ruled in my favor, and I received a large settlement. I then sued our shared workplace for not upholding their rules about employee conduct and won a significant amount. So while I ended up doing well financially, I was still left divorced and feeling lonely. Carrie had meant the world to me. For 8 years, life felt almost perfect. I found out about what was happening by accident. One day when Carrie's phone rang, I picked it up expecting it to be her. Instead, I heard my boss's voice saying something unexpected. I was shocked and hung up right away. When Carrie answered the next call, I could see she was upset, but she just said, "Okay," by the end. That night, Carrie mentioned she wanted to visit a friend, and I said that was fine. We didn't have any kids, so it didn't matter if one of us went out. By the way, I should introduce myself properly. I'm Michael Milbrook, an accountant at a mid-sized firm. Most people just call me Mike. I'm good at my job, but I can't say it excites me much. Carrie works as a dental hygienist for a local dentist. Most people would describe her as cute rather than beautiful, but to me, she was the most beautiful person I had ever met. I'm biased. I truly loved her from the moment I first saw her. But after that phone call, I began to question if I really knew my wife. Suddenly, she didn't seem as lovely as I once thought. I started to wonder if our 3 years of marriage were real. I needed to find out if she was being unfaithful. That night, when my wife left, I quickly got into my car and followed her until she arrived at a motel. I saw her approach a door and knock. When it opened, my boss stood there in just a towel. He hugged my wife, and even though she pushed him away, she went inside the room. I couldn't understand what she saw in him. He wasn't charming. After waiting about 15 minutes, I decided to go to the door. I knocked and said in a false, polite voice, "Front office, there might be a problem in your room." A few moments later, my boss opened the door and I stepped inside. I found my wife on one of the beds, looking shocked to see me. "Oh, God," she exclaimed. "Mike, this isn't what it looks like. I didn't want to be here, but I had no choice." At that moment, I lost control. I confronted my boss and struck him hard. I could hear the crack of his nose. Blood spread across the floor. I kicked him too, hitting him where it would hurt the most. He fell to the ground, curled up in pain, but I wasn't done. I confronted him further and hit him several more times, leaving him in rough shape. Then I turned to my wife, who looked stunned. "You say you didn't have a choice. Now you have a real choice, to come home or not. I suggest you don't." With that, I left the room and drove home. Once there, I poured myself a drink and tried to calm down in my chair. About 30 minutes later, there was a loud knock at the front door. I knew who it was, the police. After they confirmed my identity, they put me in handcuffs and took me to the county jail. I had heard it could be tough inside. A sensible person might have felt scared. I didn't care. I was still so angry that nothing else mattered. Sadly, another inmate decided to pick a fight with me. I defended myself, and he ended up needing medical attention. Fortunately, a camera in the cell showed that he had started it. The police believed I was just protecting myself. That night, I had fought 2 men. Both ended up in the hospital. One of them, Justin, sustained serious injuries. I was relieved in a way since I thought he wouldn't be able to bother others anymore. Besides that, he faced a lot of pain from his injuries. It's strange because I'm not really a fighter. I'm a bit over 6 feet tall and weigh about 170 pounds. My dad taught my brothers and me how to box when we were young, but I had never been in a real fight before. Even though I hurt my boss badly, my heart felt worse. The woman I cared for most had shown me she was unfaithful. Carrie tried to reach out to me in the days that followed, but I shut her out. I wanted to forget my pain. When my brother came, he filled me in on everything. He helped arrange my bail and took me to stay with him and his wife, Susan. They were kind to me, but I was in so much pain that I was difficult to be around. One night, Susan had a serious talk with me. "Mike, I know you're hurting, but your brother and I are trying to help you. If you keep being rude, you can go back to your wife or find a hotel." I apologized, and from that moment on, I tried to get my emotions in check. My brother and sister-in-law became my support, and I was thankful for them. Tom filed for my divorce and also took action against my employer. Soon, my former boss countersued me for the injuries I had caused him. Tom was wise. He delayed the lawsuit against me until after the criminal charges were resolved. Once I was found not guilty due to temporary insanity, Tom turned his focus on my boss. When the trial started, Justin seemed confident, thinking he would win. But my brother had gathered lots of evidence. By the end of the criminal case, Tom had found several women who used to work for Justin, and they shared similar experiences about how he had treated them. When the trial concluded, the jury wanted to award me damages. Justin was fired immediately, but that was just the beginning of his troubles. He was arrested for serious accusations. The issue with the case against Justin was that there wasn't physical evidence. However, 6 women spoke out against him, sharing the same story. I didn't follow the trial closely because I was so caught up in my own divorce. I remember reading that he had been found guilty of something, but it wasn't a serious crime. It didn't matter much to me other than he would go to prison. I knew that Carrie was called as a witness and attended Justin's trial every day. Everyone was very disappointed that he only got 7 years. Even though it was clear Carrie had been hurt, I couldn't let it go. All I could think about was my wife and Justin together, so I decided to get a divorce. I tried to see things from Carrie's side, but it was hard. If she had just trusted me and told me the truth, I would have dealt with Justin. But she didn't. And the fact that she went back to him made me wonder if maybe, deep down, Carrie preferred being with him. The final divorce hearing was extremely hard for me. Carrie was there with her lawyer, and she kept trying to talk to me before it started. I made sure that didn't happen. During the hearing, she tried to get my attention. When I looked at her once, I saw a pleading look in her eyes, but I was too hurt to respond. When the judge granted our divorce, Carrie became very upset. They even called for an ambulance. I thought I would never see her again, but I was wrong. After finishing my legal issues, I had to move on with my life. Once everything was settled, I found out I had nearly $3 million. This was after I paid my brother 30% of what I received. He didn't want to take it, but I insisted. Now I was divorced and in a good financial position, but I wasn't sure what to do next. I couldn't return to my old job. They were not happy with me at all, and I wasn't interested in working there anyway. My life felt aimless, and I was still hurting. It was Susan who had the idea to change my life. For a long time, I wasn't sure if this change was a good thing. She suggested I take a trip to Europe. She reminded me that I had always wanted to travel, and now I could. Of course, when I had mentioned traveling before, I had always thought Carrie would be with me. Now, if I traveled, Carrie wouldn't be there. I started my journey in Italy. Everyone I spoke to raved about the country. I enjoyed the historic sights, and the wine was great. But overall, I was a bit let down. Next, I took a train to Germany. On the train, I met a lovely English lady named Sarah Smythe. She turned out to be a great companion and a wonderful guide. Sarah was also very pleasant to look at with her short blonde hair and soft brown eyes. She was petite at 5'3" with a nice figure, but what I appreciated the most was her lively enthusiasm for everything. It was a nice change from the tough time I had over the last 6 months. Sarah was a teacher at a place called Ludgrove. She said it like it was important, but I didn't know it at all. I asked her many questions about the subjects she taught and about her life. I was surprised to find out that she taught math and science to kids aged 8 to 13. The joy in her eyes showed how much she loved her job. For me, Germany would have been just a dull place if it weren't for Sarah. She knew so much about the Second World War. I had never really cared about that time in history, but Sarah made it interesting. Visiting the real locations was amazing. Some might think there was an attraction between Sarah and me, but that wasn't going to happen. When we first talked, she told me she had just ended a serious relationship. It was a hard breakup, and she wasn't looking to meet anyone new for a while. I quickly let her know that I wasn't interested in dating either. I shared my story about my recent divorce. I was surprised by how much compassion she seemed to have for my ex-wife. I just noted that as a thing women sometimes do and moved on. Even though I wasn't looking for a new girlfriend, I was taken aback by how many women seemed to show interest in me. I wondered if it was because of the rough look I had developed. I hadn't shaved for a few days, and my hair was longer than usual. This was not on purpose. I had just gotten lazy with my grooming since I no longer had to care for a job. The attention bothered me. I often found myself apologizing to Sarah about it. It was awkward because some women would express their interest right in front of her, not knowing we were just friends. Sarah just laughed and even made jokes when other women showed interest in me. In fairness, she also had many admirers, and she felt just as awkward when they approached her. Naturally, I teased her about that too. After Germany, I traveled to Sweden and Denmark alone. Sarah went to Paris, where she had booked an apartment for 2 weeks. I really liked both Scandinavian countries I visited. The people were friendly. It was a little tough to communicate without Sarah since she spoke 4 languages in addition to English: Italian, French, German, and Spanish. Still, I managed to get my message across. We agreed to meet up at her apartment for the final 3 days of her holiday. Paris is a beautiful city, but I didn't have the best impression of the people there. I know it's not fair to judge everyone based on just a few, but it felt like some Parisians had a grudge against Americans. I found many French men to be rather rude. The attention Sarah had gotten in other places didn't compare to the boldness of the French men. Once, one sat down at our dinner table and started speaking to Sarah in French. It didn't end well for him when Sarah splashed wine in his face. He just laughed and looked at me with a smirk. But when I got up and he saw that I was taller than him, he finally took the hint and left. On our second night in Paris, I took Sarah out to dinner and then for a walk by the Seine River. It was a lovely night with a bright moon. We stopped to watch a few boats go by, and for the first time since my marriage ended, I felt relaxed. "Sarah," I said, looking at her, "thank you for everything. You've made this trip enjoyable when it could have been really hard. It's just what I needed." I leaned down and kissed her on the cheek. A moment later, Sarah gently held my face and shared a brief, tender moment. I must admit, I reciprocated the sentiment. When we pulled away, we didn't speak about it. Instead, Sarah started sharing stories about the city and the famous sights we were passing. I went to bed that night feeling confused but happy. On our last night in Paris, Sarah made us a lovely dinner in her apartment. We sat on her balcony and talked for hours. But then I reminded her that we had to get up early the next morning to catch our flight back to London. As I walked past Sarah's room on my way to the bathroom, her door opened. She was wearing a pretty outfit that caught my eye. With the soft light from her room behind her, she came into my arms and shared a warm moment. I couldn't help but lean in closer. Before I knew it, we were by her bed, and I was holding her close. But suddenly I paused and stood up. "I'm sorry, Sarah," I said, my voice shaky. "I can't go any further, it feels too soon." I saw disappointment in her eyes, but she stood up slowly and hugged me. "I understand. I just feel like I might be developing strong feelings for you." "You're a wonderful person," I told her. "I'm just very confused right now, and I don't want to hurt you." She gave me a gentle smile, and I went to finish getting ready for bed. As I brushed my teeth, I wondered if I made a mistake by stopping things with Sarah. The next day, neither of us mentioned our moment. When we arrived back in London, Sarah and I said our goodbyes and took separate taxis home. I thanked Sarah again for being such a great guide, and she gave me a quick kiss on the cheek. Before we parted, we shared our addresses and promised to keep in touch, although I doubted that would happen. I invited her to dinner with me on my last night, and she agreed. I still had 2 weeks left in my trip, so I rented a Range Rover to explore Great Britain. Excitement bubbled within me as I planned to visit major cities in England first, before heading up to Scotland, which I had heard was beautiful. After Scotland, I intended to journey south to Wales. I chose the Range Rover based on its reputation for handling the steep roads of Scotland. That was my plan, but things didn't unfold as I had anticipated. The next evening, frustration mounted as I attempted to leave London. I had spent extra time at the bank to ensure I had sufficient funds for Scotland, only to realize that my phone charger was packed away in one of my suitcases and my phone battery had died. Rather than rummage through my luggage, I opted for a paper map, a choice that had its benefits and drawbacks. After leaving the bank just as it closed, I spent about 5 minutes studying the map before selecting a direction. However, an hour later, I found myself completely lost outside London. When I stopped to ask for directions, I only ended up more confused. Feeling disheartened, I pulled off the main road and parked beneath some trees. I tried to recall the names of the last few streets I'd traveled, but after 20 minutes of searching, I realized none of them were marked on the map. I stepped out of the car while muttering to myself and went to the trunk in search of my charger. Suddenly, it dawned on me. I had left it in my hotel room. I felt incredibly foolish. Here I was, in a foreign country without a phone and no clear idea of where to go. As I contemplated my next steps, thoughts of safety crossed my mind. Knowing that firearms are illegal in England and in most European countries as well, I still felt the need for some form of protection during my travels. I had brought a small firearm with me, believing it would suffice. You may wonder how I managed to get the firearm past customs. It wasn't very challenging. I disassembled it and packed the pieces in cleverly prepared boxes. For anyone casually glancing, my packing made it difficult to discern what the contents were. The barrel resembled a smoking pipe, so fortunately, I encountered no issues throughout my trip. You might question the utility of a disassembled firearm. As I traveled through the countryside, I kept the parts nearby, knowing I could quickly assemble it if necessary. Until now, I hadn't had to use it, and I sincerely hoped I wouldn't need to. However, given that I was in a remote area and darkness was approaching, I decided to assemble the firearm and prepare it. After putting it together, I secured it discreetly and ventured down a narrow road, curious about where it would lead. The winding path brought me to a large house on a hill. I thought perhaps someone there could assist me in finding my way. As I approached the hill, an unsettled feeling washed over me when I noticed the absence of lights on this side of the house. I turned off my car and approached the front. Just as I was about to go around the corner, I heard shouting and 2 loud noises. I quickly looked around and saw 2 men on the ground. Another man was struggling with a young boy who was kicking and trying to escape. The other 2 men were yelling at each other, and one was pointing at the ones on the ground. "You really messed up," I heard the man shout. "Go back inside and check on the others." When the man went inside, the one with the boy tried to push him into a car. I stepped out and shouted, "Drop the weapon and show me your hands." He didn't listen. Instead, he turned quickly. I shot back. His aim was off, but I managed to hit him in the shoulder. He dropped the weapon and fell to his knees. The man holding the boy let him go to see what happened. The boy took off running. The man chased after him, and I aimed for the man but missed. My shot hit one of his legs, and he fell, but he got back up quickly and hobbled off. I used that moment to run back to my car and started it up. I pressed the gas pedal hard and sped away from the building. As I drove past the man on his knees, he scrambled for his weapon. Moments later, he fired at me. I thought he was using his other hand, so I felt safe, but I was wrong. I felt a sharp pain on my left side. When I touched it, my hand came back with blood. I didn't know how badly I was hurt, but there was no time to stop. I raced down the road and spotted the scared boy running alongside it. I came to a quick stop and opened the back door. "Get in, kid," I shouted. "They'll be here in a moment." The boy looked scared, but he must have thought I was a better choice than the people behind us. As soon as he closed the door, I pressed the gas pedal and we shot down what I hoped was the driveway. "Hey, kid," I asked, glancing at him in the mirror. "Do you know where we are?" The boy looked dazed and just shook his head. At the end of the driveway, I had to choose, right or left. I picked left. Bad choice. If I had gone right, I would have reached the highway and found help quickly. Instead, left took us further into the open countryside, where there didn't seem to be any buildings nearby. I later found out that we were in an area with very big homes, spaced far apart. Darn, I said to myself, realizing we were running low on fuel. The boy seemed puzzled, so I switched to a British style for fun. "Petrol," I corrected. "We're almost out of petrol." "Oh, that's unfortunate," he replied softly. "What are we going to do?" I liked his British accent. It was pleasant, but right then I had other things on my mind. "I'm getting off this road," I said, turning sharply to the left and speeding up a hill. Thankfully, I was in a Range Rover, which handled the rough terrain well. I doubted the Mercedes I had seen would do as well. Looking at the compass on the dashboard, I told him, "I'm heading south because London is south of us." I glanced at the boy again in the mirror. He looked very scared but was keeping it together, and I respected him for that. Most kids would be crying in his situation. As we drove, I asked him his name. The question startled him, but he stammered, George. "George, I'm Mike," I said. "Now, what happened?" "Please, sir, what is your full name?" he asked cautiously. My full name? I was caught off guard for a moment until I realized what he meant. "Oh, it's Mike Adams." "Thank you for saving me, Mr. Adams," the boy said quietly. "I haven't saved anyone yet," I said, wanting to learn more. "Why were those men after you?" I'm not sure," George replied, his voice trembling. I didn't want to push him too hard. I admired his bravery. "I was at my friend Peter's house when those men came in. They covered my eyes and carried me away. I don't know what happened to Peter or his family." "It sounds like they have money. This might be a kidnapping, and they probably took Peter too," I suggested. "We need to keep going until we find help," I said. We walked over fields and streams but couldn't find any houses or buildings. I decided to head south, hoping we would find a road. We climbed one hill, crossed a field, and went up another hill. When we reached the top, the car started to make strange sounds. I realized we were almost out of gas, so I found some bushes to hide the car. After the car stopped, I opened the door and went to the back. I lifted the tailgate and grabbed one of my suitcases. I searched it for what I needed but couldn't find it, so I pulled out my other bag. After a short search, I found my flashlight. I turned it on and looked through my bags again. A moment later, I found what I wanted, my extra magazine. "George, listen," I said after opening his door. "We need to go on foot. I'm not sure if those men will notice we left the road, but we should be careful and keep moving until we find help." Before we set out, I took 2 sweaters, a wool hat, a large bottle of water, and 4 packages of crackers. It was getting chilly, and I didn't know how long we'd be out here. I was feeling a bit hungry, too. I knew the car was facing south, so I looked up and picked a bright star that was in that direction. We could follow that. We walked for about 3 hours, taking breaks to rest and drink water. We crossed several streams, but I didn't fill the bottle because I didn't want to risk it. It was almost midnight, and I could tell George was tired. Still, he didn't complain. We mostly stayed quiet so we wouldn't be heard. After finding some bushes, I made 2 small beds out of leaves. I told George to sleep, and he quickly fell asleep. I stayed awake for a while longer. I needed to check my injury. I had a deep cut on my side, and it was still bleeding a little. I tore a piece from my undershirt and wrapped it around the cut. Then I covered George with one sweater and put on the other one before I tried to sleep as well. I fell into a restless sleep. I woke up with the first light of morning. I sat up and groaned. My side hurt a lot. I wished I had taken some pain medicine with me. As I moved, George woke up too. He sat up and I asked, "How do you feel this morning?" "I'm quite sore, sir," he replied. "Same here," I chuckled. "Here, have some crackers." I tossed him a package. While he ate, I studied the young boy. He was still scared but managed to stay calm. I handed him some water along with another pack of crackers. Then I checked my injury, and thankfully it didn't seem to be bleeding anymore. "Excuse me, sir," George said quietly. What will happen to us? We're going to find help. Your parents will come to get you, and I'll continue my vacation. But first, I think I'll need to see a doctor for my injury. You seem very brave, sir, he said, looking down. I wish I could be brave, too. What do you mean? You've been really brave, I reassured him. Most kids would be crying a lot. But I did cry, sir, he replied, looking worried. You won't tell anyone, will you? Listen, George, I said softly. Crying isn't a big deal. Everyone cries sometimes. It just shows that you care. There's nothing to feel bad about. I just don't want people to be let down by me, George said, looking at me earnestly. George, I'm going to share an important lesson with you, I said with a smile. There's only one person you need to make proud. George looked puzzled. Who is that? The most important person to please is yourself, I said firmly. If you do what you believe is right and try your best, there's no reason to say sorry to anyone, and if anyone tells you otherwise, just ignore them. This made George laugh a little, lifting his spirits. After gathering our few belongings, we set off again. I was in a lot of pain, and I could tell my injury was getting worse because I couldn't keep it clean. I also lost my way at night and preferred to stay close to the trees instead of walking openly in the fields. The path was tougher than the night before, but we kept moving. In the distance, I spotted helicopters flying around. I hoped they were searching for us and that they would come our way. By midday, we had run out of water, so I had to refill our bottle from a stream. I just hoped the water was safe to drink. Still, I thought we should be found before either of us felt too sick. As night began to fall, we still hadn't found any houses. Later, I would learn we had actually passed several homes without noticing. If we had taken a different direction, we might have seen them. I found a cluster of bushes and made a spot for us to rest. This time, there weren't as many leaves, and I was in a lot of pain. I also felt a bit warm and realized I probably had a fever. The next day, we started again, but it was tough for me to keep up. In George's eyes, I could see sympathy, worry, and concern. I knew George still didn't fully trust me, but I smiled and told him everything was fine. He clearly didn't believe me. By the second and now the third day, our talks had increased a lot. I wasn't worried about being overheard anymore. We discussed many things, his school, his friends, and a bit about his parents. He seemed uncertain about talking about them, so I didn't press. He did mention that his parents were very strict and had high expectations for him. I reminded him that he only needed to please himself. As the afternoon wore on, I began to feel hot. We reached a point where we could no longer stay under the trees. We had to cross a field to continue. I told George we would hurry across the field to the woods ahead. We were about 100 yards from the trees when I heard the loud noise of a diesel engine. I muttered to myself because it sounded like a fancy car. Run, George, I said, and I started after him. Looking back, I saw the car come over the hill and head straight for us. Just in time, we reached a group of fallen trees as shots rang out from the car. We scrambled over the fallen trees and I got into a safe position. George, listen closely, I said, holding his arm. I want you to keep running. Get as far away as you can. When the shooting stops, find a place to hide and don't come out until it's all clear. But Mr. Adams, what about you? He asked, concern in his eyes. I'll do my best to hold them off, I replied. Now, be brave and go. George looked like he wanted to argue, but I pushed him away and he ran. It was a good thing he did because the car was now very close. They started shooting again and I shot back. I don't think they expected that. People don't usually carry guns in Britain. The car skidded to a stop, sliding sideways. The men hid behind the car and fired back. There were about 5 men in that car, all armed. I found a spot where I could crouch and shoot through the gaps in the trees. I hoped George was getting far away from us. I was dealing with my second magazine when it happened. It felt like the shooting had been going on for hours, but it was only about 5 minutes. I had been lucky. The trees shielded me from most of their shots. But then one bullet got through and hit my side, knocking me down. It took me some time to get back up. While I was down, one of the men decided to come after me. That was a big mistake for him. I hit him in the center of his body and he fell down. I shot twice more, but then I started to feel weak. Suddenly I heard a loud noise and something dark flew over us. That's when I saw helicopters coming down. Armed men were coming down on ropes and firing as they landed. Then I felt very tired and closed my eyes. I woke up once to bright lights and a lot of pain. Adams, the inspector continued, You've shown great courage. It's understandable that you don't remember everything clearly right now. Your priority was to protect the boy." I nodded slowly, fatigue weighing on me. The inspector maintained a calm demeanor as he took notes. "Can you tell me more about the kidnappers? Any details, no matter how small, could be important." I paused, trying to recall the events. "There were 2 of them. They seemed organized, but I didn't get a good look at their faces. They had a van, and they were quite aggressive. I just wanted to get George to safety." The inspector's expression was serious, and he leaned forward slightly. "You did the right thing. It's essential to keep the information flowing. Your memory might improve with time, so don't hesitate to reach out if you think of anything else." I appreciated his kindness, but was still overwhelmed. "Thank you. I just want to know that he's okay." "You'll be able to see him soon," the inspector assured me. "For now, focus on resting and recovering. We'll take care of the rest." After the inspector left, a nurse returned with some medication. "This should help you feel better," she said gently. As she administered the dose, I felt grateful for the care I was receiving. I closed my eyes briefly, drifting into a peaceful state, feeling safer knowing George was unharmed. "Adams, how did you end up at the house where all of this took place?" he asked. "I got lost," I admitted, feeling a bit embarrassed. "I didn't charge my phone before leaving London, and I was trying to use a paper map. I ended up hopelessly lost. I found a dirt road that led to the back of the mansion. I thought I could ask someone there for directions, but when I got to the front, I saw them trying to grab George. I had a gun with me, and I used it to help him escape. We took off in my rented car, but I was almost out of gas. When the car stopped, we had to run on foot. Like I said, we couldn't find anyone who could help. After that, I was just trying to stall them." "How did you find us?" "We had search teams and helicopters looking for you since the kidnapping was reported. One of the helicopter pilots saw your car and followed it. They found you and assisted you, then took you and the boy to the hospital. At first, we thought the boy was badly hurt because he was covered in blood, but it turned out to be your blood. He wouldn't leave your side." I told him he was really brave, I said, almost to myself. "What was that, Mr. Adams?" the inspector asked. "Nothing, just that he was very brave." The inspector leaned back and smiled. "That's quite a story." "It's the truth, I promise," I insisted. "If you don't believe me, you can ask George." "Oh, I believe you, Mr. Adams. There's just one more thing I want to clarify. Where did you get the gun you used to protect yourself?" I froze for a moment, feeling a wave of panic. The realization hit me hard that I was in a difficult situation. Still, I knew I needed that gun or I might not be here. "I brought it with me from the United States," I answered quietly. "I don't believe that, Mr. Adams," the inspector replied with a laugh. "Bringing a gun into the UK is against the law. The gun we found had its serial numbers removed. So, you must have gotten it from the kidnappers. You were fortunate to do that, right?" I was confused at first, but then it all made sense. The inspector was giving me a way to deny any wrongdoing about the gun. I decided not to question it. "Yes, that's what happened. I surprised one of the kidnappers and managed to take his gun." "Great," Inspector Blair said as he stood up. "You know, I could really use a cup of tea. Would you like one too?" "Honestly, Inspector, I would love a cup of coffee." He laughed and replied, "I'll see what I can do." 10 minutes later, the inspector returned with a staff member who brought a cup of tea and one of coffee. There was also a plate of cookies, which I think the British call biscuits. "Mr. Adams," the inspector started after taking a sip of his tea, "there's a lot I need to tell you. We also need to decide a few things before you speak to anyone else. First, let me clear up a misunderstanding. The boy you know as George is actually named Peter. Peter is the future Duke of Windsor, or as you might say, the future King of England. The correct title, however, is the future King of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland." That information shocked me. I didn't know what to say, so I stayed quiet. His Highness was spending the weekend with his friend George at the estate of Lord and Lady Ashford, who are George's parents. There was a security team of 8. 2 team members were killed, 3 were injured, and the rest were unable to help. It was a carefully planned attempt to kidnap the prince. If you hadn't been there, they would have succeeded, and we would have had no clue what had happened. We still don't know why they tried to kidnap the prince or how they found out where he was. We will figure those things out. For now, I just know that you are quite brave." I thought about what the inspector said and replied softly, "I don't feel brave. I just feel a bit uneasy." "Should I call someone for help?" the inspector asked. I shook my head. "No, I'll be fine. Now we need to decide what to do next." The inspector took his last sip of tea and pulled out a notebook and pen. Word about the attempt on the prince spread quickly. The country has been in chaos since then. Now that the prince is safe, people have been celebrating for days, both here and abroad. However, it has also put nearly every investigative branch in Britain under a lot of pressure to find out what happened. I suddenly felt anxious as this entire event seemed like a possible attack. If that were true, my family and I could be in danger. "Can I make a request?" I asked. "You can certainly make a request, but whether I'll be able to grant it is another matter." "Could you please keep my name out of it?" I said quickly. "Interesting," the inspector replied, stroking his mustache. "Why do you want that?" "I think it would be safer," I explained. "If this was done by someone dangerous and I'm mentioned as the one who caused trouble, they might try to get back at my family and me." "Yes, I can see how that could be a concern," the inspector agreed. "I'll discuss it with my superiors and let you know in a few days. For now, we're going to keep things low-key. Are there people who might worry if they don't hear from you? If so, we can contact them with a different story." "Maybe my parents," I thought for a moment. "What day is it?" "It's Friday, the 6th. "I've lost almost a week," I said softly. "I'm supposed to fly back to the United States a week from this Sunday. I doubt I'll be out of the hospital by then. Maybe it would be best if you emailed my parents from my account and say I'm extending my trip." "We found your travel plans in your luggage. We've been checking the places you intended to stay to see if anyone reached out to you. So far, no one has tried to—" "Oh, there's one other person you should know about," I remembered. "I'm supposed to have dinner with Miss Sarah Smythe on Saturday night." The inspector raised his eyebrows at the mention of my dinner plans. "And how do you know Miss Smythe?" "I met her on a train to Germany," I explained. "We became friends and she helped me with my trip. It was a pleasant connection." "I see," the inspector nodded as he stood up. "Do you have her email?" When I nodded, the inspector continued. "I think we should email her and say that you've hurt yourself. You're not seriously hurt, but you prefer to see your doctor at home. In the meantime, there will be officers outside your room all day and night until we figure out what to do. I'll contact you in a few days when we have more information. For now, I hope you understand that we need to keep you out of touch. Will that be all right?" I shook my head, agreeing. The next few days were quite tough. As I started to feel better, they began to reduce my pain medication. That meant there were times when I felt uncomfortable, especially after physical therapy. I started to feel restless and stuck being alone in my room. At first, it was interesting to watch the news on TV. In Great Britain, people seemed very thankful and happy, but there was also a sense of tension in the air. After a day or two of watching the news non-stop, it became hard to keep watching. I guess I was feeling overwhelmed by everything that had happened. Just when I thought Inspector Blair might have forgotten about me, he showed up the next Tuesday. I hoped he would have some good news, especially about when I could go home. I just wanted to feel better and return to my normal life. As I stood by the window, wishing to be outside, Inspector Blair entered my room. "You look much better, Mr. Adams. I'm really glad to see you recovering so quickly. It makes my news even better." "That sounds good," I said as I sat down on the edge of the bed. "We've been working very hard to understand what happened in that unfortunate event. Unfortunately, we still don't know who was behind the kidnapping. However, we managed to capture 2 of the people involved, and we hope one of them can share useful information." "That means my situation is still urgent," I replied. "I hope you keep my name out of everything. You are a unique person, Mr. Adams. Most would want to be recognized for their actions, but you wish to remain private. Your main concern is for your family, which is admirable. But to ease your mind, my superiors agree to keep your identity private. We will do everything we can to ensure your name doesn't get out. However, I must admit that some in the department wanted to release your name right away. They were initially unsure if you had anything to do with the plot. Some thought you might have been involved but then changed their minds. Luckily, a check of the tracking device on the rental car matched your story. Plus, the prince insisted that you were not part of the kidnapping. That's great to hear, I said, smiling. Does this mean I can go back to the United States once I leave the hospital? I really want to go home. Yes, you will be allowed to leave the country as soon as you are discharged, the inspector confirmed. We think it's better for you to leave as soon as possible. Have my parents tried to reach me? I asked. Yes, they have called and emailed you, the inspector replied. We couldn't answer the calls, but we did let them know through email that your cell phone coverage is limited. I spoke with the doctors, and they plan to release me a week from Saturday. We've also arranged a flight for you that afternoon. You will be leaving the hospital after lunch with a security guard. The Friday before my release, the inspector came back and returned my phone. He told me I could call anyone I wanted. I called my parents and told them I had an accident. I said it wasn't serious, but that I needed to be in the hospital. My mom got very worried and wanted to come help me home. I reassured her that I had just fallen off a bicycle and had bumped into something sharp, but I was okay. I told her I would be home before she could even buy a ticket, which seemed to calm her down. On Saturday morning after breakfast, I got up and dressed. I was eager to leave the hospital and go home. Around 11 o'clock, I heard some noise in the hallway outside my room. When I looked out, I saw a well-dressed couple with a young boy walking toward me. After a moment, I recognized George, or rather, Peter. As the couple approached, people in the hallway bowed or curtsied. It felt strange to see this in real life. You read about how royalty are treated, but you never think you will see it yourself. The couple was kind to everyone they passed, but Peter looked a bit nervous. When he saw me, he hurried over. Your Highness, I said with a smile. Mr. Adams, it's so good to see you well, he said with a big smile. When they lifted you into the helicopter, I was so scared they had hurt you. Thank you for helping me. By then, the king and queen were standing beside their son. Your Majesties, I said with a slight bow. It is a great honor to meet you. No, Mr. Adams, the honor is ours, the king said as he reached out his hand, and we shook hands. I couldn't believe I was shaking hands with the king, and I knew I could never tell anyone, but that was fine with me. Mr. Adams, the queen said, I can't thank you enough for saving our son. I've had a hard time since the incident. I can't imagine what would have happened if you hadn't been there. You will always be in our thoughts. The queen then offered her hand, and I was surprised when I lifted it in a customary gesture of appreciation. I didn't know how to react. You should be very proud of your son, was all I could think to say. He was very brave in a tough situation. Without his help, I don't think we would have made it. With that, the meeting came to an end, and they moved on. The royal family had been told not to make a big deal about me, as it might raise questions. Later, I would find out that this visit was part of their schedule, but they had insisted on coming to thank me in person. I was moved by the kindness. Spending so much time in the hospital made me reflect on my life, and I wasn't very happy with myself. On the flight home, my mind kept wandering to what I should do next. When I got to the airport, my parents were there to meet me. I could see my mother's relief when she realized I was okay. She hugged me tightly, filled with joy. My father was happy too and gave me a hug, which surprised me a little because my injuries still hurt. But having him embrace me was special, even though he usually said he wasn't a hugger. He always made time to hug my mom, though. As we waited by the luggage carousel, my mother became serious. Mike, I need to tell you something that might be difficult to hear. If you feel upset, please direct it at me. I don't think you could do anything to make me upset, Mom. You might change your mind soon, she said, glancing over at the exit doors. I turned to see Carrie standing there looking troubled. Her eyes were red and it was clear she had been crying. She looked pale and a bit shaky. A few weeks earlier, I might have been upset with my mother and left, but after my close call with death, my perspective had changed. Many things that once seemed important now didn't matter as much. When I looked at Carrie, I didn't see someone who had hurt me. I saw a woman who was lonely, sad, and scared. She seemed to still care for me, and she was still the wonderful person I had fallen for. I smiled and walked over to her. Hi, Carrie. I said softly. "Thank you for coming to welcome me home." That was all it took for her to let go. She hugged me tightly and expressed her sorrow, saying again and again, "I'm so sorry. Please forgive me." I comforted her and then led her to where my parents were standing. They had already taken care of my luggage. "I didn't really enjoy the meal on the plane, so I didn't eat much," I said cheerfully. "How about I take you all out to dinner? I'm really hungry." I can't say everything was perfect between Carrie and me right away, but it was a start. I was still unsure about what I wanted, but I knew I didn't want to hold grudges anymore. I wanted her to be happy. A few days later, I invited her to lunch to talk about our feelings. We began going to counseling sessions, and eventually we started dating again. Through our sessions, I discovered that Carrie was afraid of disappointing me, which is why she had made some poor choices. I also realized that I had encouraged this idea by showering my wife with compliments when she did things I thought were good. When she didn't meet my expectations, I could tell Carrie noticed my disappointment. I didn't see it at the time, but looking back, it was clear. It took 6 months to work through our difficulties, but my love for Carrie never faded. So, with just a few family members, we remarried in her parents' backyard. Out of all the guests, I think our mothers were the happiest. For our honeymoon, I took Carrie on a cruise. It may sound unusual, but we chose not to be intimate before the wedding because we didn't want to mix our feelings. That first night in our stateroom, we felt nervous. This might sound odd since we had been so close before, but this second chance felt entirely new. I felt a much deeper connection to Carrie. To me, Carrie has always been the most beautiful person I've known. She has long auburn hair and a cute nose. Her kind brown eyes were what attracted me to her from the very beginning. As I climbed into bed with Carrie, I felt her excitement. She smelled lovely and felt warm against me. We cuddled for a bit, and I shared a gentle moment with her. When she turned to face me, we exchanged a soft kiss. As we settled in, I felt a sense of closeness. The first night was special in its own way. Most of our honeymoon felt like that first night, full of love and joy. We explored different places, went dancing, and attended shows, but our connection kept growing. I fell in love with Carrie all over again. However, a small feeling of doubt lingered in my mind, but it didn't show up until a few years later. I believe it all started that first night, but 2 months later, Carrie found out she was expecting. 7 months later, we welcomed a little boy we named Grant. 11 months later, we welcomed a little girl and named her Louisa. 3 years after that, Carrie decided to go back to work part-time. At first, I was okay with her new job, but over time, I couldn't shake my worries. Each month, my fears and anxious thoughts grew. I kept these feelings to myself, but they were affecting our marriage. Even though Carrie hadn't done anything to make me suspicious, I still felt uneasy. Without realizing it, I started putting some distance between us. I couldn't help but feel that Carrie might hurt me again. Carrie had to deal with my mood swings, and it was hard on her. We began to argue more often. Finally, I started to think about divorce. It was Carrie who encouraged me to try counseling again. At first, the sessions didn't seem helpful at all. But slowly, I began to understand the mistakes I had made. After that, things improved greatly between us. We started to repair our relationship, and for the next year, life felt wonderful for our family. Then, everything changed. We didn't know it, but Justin Bosner had been released from prison early. His resentment toward me had grown while he was locked up. One night, after putting our kids to bed, we heard loud crashing sounds. I went to see what happened while Carrie checked on the children. When I entered the living room, I was shocked to find Justin standing there. "Well, Mike, I've been waiting for this," he said with anger. "I'm going to make you pay, and then I'll take what's mine." I wanted to confront him, but he raised the weapon, warning me to stay back. "I wouldn't try anything, Mike. I can stop you before you even get close, but I want to enjoy this moment." Just then, I saw Carrie rush in from the side. She grabbed the gun as Justin struggled to take it back. I rushed over, but the weapon fired before I reached them. Carrie fell to the ground, and in anger, I hit Justin, sending him back against the wall. I fell to my knees beside Carrie, who was hurt. I grabbed the phone and called for help. It felt like forever, but the emergency services arrived in about 8 minutes. I used a towel to try to stop the bleeding. I was terrified, pleading, "Please stay with me, Carrie, don't leave." Carrie looked up at me. "You're the only one I've ever loved. Thank you for giving me another chance." Please take care of our kids." Then her eyes closed and they never opened again. The hospital staff worked hard to save her, but it was too late. I was devastated. Thankfully, our mothers were there to support us. They moved in and managed everything while I lost myself in thought. Losing Carrie made me realize that I was her one true love. I remember being at her funeral, but the details are a blur. All I could think was that it should have been me instead of her. Justin was arrested and faced serious charges. He took his own life in jail before the trial could start. I felt anger that he didn't have to face what he had done. After about 3 months, I began to feel a bit better. My kids were my main motivation to recover because I had to be strong for them. They missed their mom just like I did, but kids adapt quickly. I didn't know if I would ever fully heal, but they depended on me. For Carrie's sake, I couldn't let them down. I was still hurting, and even though I tried to hide it, my mother understood. She suggested I take the kids away for a while. I was hesitant at first, but eventually agreed to go back to Great Britain. My parents and Carrie's parents decided to join us to help with the children. At this point, I was no longer worried about going back to England. About 1.5 years after the kidnapping, the police had figured out the plot to kidnap the Crown Prince. It turned out to be a small group opposed to the royal family. There were only about 30 of them, but 2 worked inside Buckingham Palace, which gave them insider information. Most of the group had no idea about the leader's plans, but they all faced varying prison sentences. The ultimate goal had been to harm the Crown Prince. After my divorce, I had put the money from the settlements into investments, which had grown to nearly $5 million. So I decided to treat my family on this trip with first-class tickets for everyone. I booked rooms at the Langham, one of London's finest hotels. I also arranged for a passenger van for our tour of Scotland and Wales. What I didn't know was that a media frenzy was about to erupt in London, and I would be at the center of it. When I spoke to Inspector Blair about maintaining confidentiality, I thought the information would remain private. Instead, it was only kept sealed for 5 years. A year later, someone requested to make the records public, and that request was approved. Although I had asked for my name to be kept out of all documents, that didn't happen. My name appeared everywhere. Even as we flew back to Great Britain, reporters were eagerly looking into the story. If I had known what was coming, I would have never taken the trip. I would have kept my family hidden until things settled down, but I didn't know what to expect. So I got ready for a trip that I hoped would help me heal from losing Carrie and the guilt I felt for not fully trusting her love. As I took out my suitcases and started to pack, I came across a phone number for Sarah Smythe that I had forgotten. I thought the number was probably out of service or owned by someone else. Still, I called it just in case it was still hers. If I could reach her, maybe she would want to join us on our trip. At the very least, I felt I owed her dinner for the one I canceled when I left England over 6 years ago. I was happy to find out that the number was still Sarah's. Even better, she remembered me right away. Sarah told me she was disappointed about our canceled dinner, but she understood why I had to cancel. I felt a bit guilty since I couldn't tell her the real reason, but that part of my life was in the past. We talked for about 2 hours. I worried about how big my phone bill would be when I got home, but the chat was enjoyable. I have a few friends with whom I can go months without talking, but when we catch up, it feels like no time has passed. It was the same with Sarah. Slowly, we shared what had happened in our lives over the past 5 years. I was glad to tell her I had remarried Carrie and had 2 children. Sarah shared that she was still teaching at the same school, but had moved up to assistant head mistress. She mentioned she had been married for a short time about 2 years ago, but that marriage had ended sadly, and her divorce had been challenging. It was clear that her past still affected her, so I told her about Carrie's death and my struggle to rebuild my life. There was a long silence after I spoke about it, and for a moment I thought she might have hung up. But then I heard her crying softly. "Oh, Michael, I feel so awful for you," she said, her voice shaky. She usually called me by my full name rather than my nickname. "But you have your children." Batterman continued, "It seems there has been a situation that may affect your stay here. We want to ensure your comfort and safety, so I need to discuss this with you." I nodded. My curiosity piqued. "What's going on?" "There was a recent event affecting our neighborhood, and while we believe you and your family are safe, We want to keep you informed and provide any assistance you may need." I appreciated his professionalism and concern. "Thank you for letting me know. I really appreciate it. Is there anything specific I should be aware of?" "Just a precautionary measure," he replied. "We are implementing additional security around the hotel. If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to ask." After our conversation, I felt reassured and thankful for the manager's attentiveness. I grabbed a cup of coffee and went to check on the kids, who were starting to stir. Once everyone was awake and ready, we decided to head out for breakfast. The day promised more adventures, and I wanted to make the most of our time in London. I was looking forward to our dinner with Sarah and sharing our experiences together. Batterman unfolded the newspaper in front of me. The headline read, "Mystery of Prince Peter's Kidnapping Revealed." Below the headline was a color picture of me. I quickly skimmed through the article and sighed. My thoughts were racing, but the most important thing on my mind was keeping my children safe. Once I read enough to realize I was completely exposed, I looked up at Mr. Batterman. "How serious is it?" I asked. "Well, there are many people and reporters outside the hotel hoping to see you. Word has gotten out that you are in London and staying here. The news stations have been focused on this all morning. I expect the crowd outside to grow. I have asked the police to manage the situation. To put it simply, Mr. Adams, you are quite a topic of interest. Everyone in Britain wants to know about you." My thoughts were a mess, and I still didn't know what to do. But then I had a feeling I understood why Mr. Batterman was here. "I assume you want us to find a different place to stay?" "Oh, no," Mr. Batterman said, looking shocked. "I came to inform you of what's happening and to assure you that we will do everything we can to keep your privacy safe." He emphasized privacy in a way that caught my attention. What should I do? I still felt confused and a bit overwhelmed by everything happening. This was just the beginning of a wild situation. "I suggest that you and your family stay in the hotel for today," Mr. Batterman replied. "Hopefully things will calm down. I'll check with my office and see what they recommend." "The only issue with that is that we have dinner plans at the Padella restaurant," I mentioned. After a moment of thinking, Mr. Batterman proposed a solution. "How about inviting your friend here for dinner at the restaurant downstairs called The Grove? It's a nice place and will be quieter and more private." I agreed that his suggestion was great, and I would cancel at the Padella and make new plans at the Grove. "Let me handle that for you," he offered, and I accepted. I was still feeling anxious about everything, and I hadn't even seen what was happening outside yet. "Mr. Batterman, may I ask you something?" I hoped he could help clear things up for me. "Of course, I'll answer anything I can," he responded. "Why is this such a big deal now?" I asked. "The event happened over 6 years ago. Sure, the police may have made mistakes, but the prince was rescued, and he's safe now." Mr. Batterman looked at me thoughtfully for a moment before smiling kindly. "Mr. Adams, you're from America, so you might see our royal family as just an interesting topic. But for us here in Britain, the monarchy is very important to our country. When we heard that the crown prince had been taken, everyone was shocked. All of Britain felt a wave of fear and sadness. When he was rescued, the country celebrated together. You might remember the 3 days of gatherings that followed his safe return. Learning that you, sir, saved the prince without wanting any recognition for it has truly amazed and moved the nation. Everyone on my team feels proud to help you in any way we can. Also, I want to assure you that you won't have to pay for anything during your stay here at the Langham." "No, I can't accept that, Mr. Batterman," I quickly replied. "Our visit is already causing you and your staff some trouble." Mr. Batterman raised his hands in response. "To ease your concerns, I talked to the main office this morning, and they are very pleased with the attention we're getting. Bookings have already increased by more than 18%. After Mr. Batterman left, Grant and Louisa came out from their room. For breakfast, there were bacon, eggs, bagels, and pastries. I made plates for them and set them down in front of the TV. I ordered the movie Toy Story since it's their favorite. Then, it was time for me to make some phone calls. First, I called a family meeting. I woke both sets of grandparents and asked them to come to my room right away. After that, I called Sarah to tell her about the change of plans. When I called her, she answered right away, "Michael, I can't believe what's on TV. Is any of it true?" Sadly, it's all true, I replied. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner, but I wanted to leave it all behind. Is that why you canceled our dinner? Sarah asked, her voice a mix of surprise and concern. Yes, I regret not informing you, I said, but the government thought it would be best for me to leave the country quickly. And what about your injuries? They say you almost died. Is that real or just an exaggeration? It's true, but it's not a big deal, I said, hoping to change the subject to dinner instead. Michael, it's a big deal, Sarah insisted, sounding worried. You had to go through all that alone and then to come home and find out your wife was lost. At this, she began to cry. Please, Sarah, don't cry. I'm okay now. I just called to see if you would like to have dinner at the hotel tonight, given everything that's happened. I'll understand if you don't want to join us. The media is making everything feel quite hectic here. I'll definitely be there tonight, Sarah replied right away. There's no way I'm letting you cancel again. I'll meet you at 6. When my grandparents arrived, I laid out the newspaper for them. Then I took them to my room and turned on the television. The news was all about me. I felt very anxious. Looking out the window, I saw a crowd of people outside. The police had set up barriers to keep people moving across the street. The whole situation felt unreal. As my mother read the article about me, she suddenly broke down in tears. This day was only getting tougher. What's wrong, Mom? I asked, worried. You were in danger and you never told us, she cried. I'm sorry about that, but I thought it was safer to keep it a secret if there were threats involved. I didn't want anything to happen to our family. And when we found out it wasn't that serious, I didn't think we needed to talk about it again. I wasn't sure if my mother was satisfied with my answer, but she seemed to accept it. We gathered in my suite before heading down for dinner. Sarah looked amazing, and my parents were very interested in her. She quickly won them over and had them laughing at her stories about being an assistant principal. Dinner started off awkwardly, as everyone in the restaurant stood and applauded when we walked in. Then people began to come to our table, introducing themselves and thanking me. I just smiled and introduced them to my family and Sarah. As more people approached our table, Grant finally asked me, Dad, are you famous? I guess I am, I replied, but I don't want to be. During dinner, Sarah shared some great news with me. After explaining who I was, the school board approved a 2-week paid leave for her. This meant she could travel with us and help guide us. Now, we just had to figure out if we could actually make this trip happen. Midway through dinner, Mr. Batterman came over to our table. I'm sorry to interrupt. May I speak with you for a moment, Mr. Adams? I excused myself and followed him to a quieter spot near the kitchen. He looked around to make sure we were alone. Mr. Adams, I've been in touch with our main office, he began, and I worried they might ask us to leave. They had a suggestion. They think it might help calm the media if you held an informal press conference tomorrow. We could arrange it in our ballroom, but it's entirely your choice. I thought about the idea for a moment, and I liked it. I think that's a great idea, I said. What do I need to do to get ready? Mr. Batterman smiled and shook his head. You don't need to do anything. We'll take care of everything. I suggest 10 in the morning for the press conference. Just come as you are. You should prepare a short speech, and then we'll give the press 30 minutes to ask questions. My parents and in-laws were really impressed when I told them about the press conference. My kids didn't seem to care. They were too excited about the cake and ice cream. The next day, I have to admit, I felt really nervous. I had never done anything like this before, and I am not one for speaking in front of people. At 9:55, Mr. Batterman took me to the main ballroom. I was amazed by how it looked. American flags and British flags decorated the wall. Red, white, and blue decorations hung everywhere. A band was set up next to a podium with the 2 flags displayed in front of it. As we walked to the podium, I saw hundreds of people with cameras filling the room. My legs felt weak as I walked down the center aisle. Suddenly, the crowd stood up and started clapping. By the time I reached the front, the noise was overwhelming. My family followed behind and sat near the front. My kids were wide-eyed, taking in everything around them. Both my mom and mother-in-law had tears in their eyes. Once seated, my kids began bouncing in their chairs, asking their grandparents all sorts of questions. Once we were on the platform, the band played the Star-Spangled Banner and then God Save the King. Mr. Batterman stepped up to the microphone and thanked everyone for coming, followed by a brief introduction. I had prepared a short speech, but I decided to set it aside. I chose to speak from the heart, expressing my gratitude and humility for all the support, even though I felt unworthy. Then the questions started. Reporters wanted to know everything that had happened. One of the first questions was how I found the prince to rescue him. I confessed that I didn't even know he was the prince until later when I was at the hospital. I shared how I had gotten lost and was just hoping someone would help me find my way. This made the reporters chuckle a bit. They were particularly interested in details about the rescue. I explained a little, but mostly I took the time to thank those who had truly helped us. I pointed out that without their arrival, I might not be here today, and the prince might not have been safe either. After Mr. Batterman thanked everyone for attending, the reporters shouted more questions as I was leaving. I tried to answer the ones I could hear. I was relieved to leave the busy ballroom and get back to my room. My kids were excited and chatting about all the visitors who had come to see me. The grandparents were thrilled with the excitement around us. When I planned this trip, I never imagined it would turn out like this. A short while later, someone knocked on the door. I opened it to find Sarah there, smiling. I gave her a hug and thanked her for coming. She laughed and said, "In America, we say nothing could keep me away. Michael, you were amazing. I was in one of the back rows, and I've never heard the press talk so nicely about anyone. They're usually pretty hard to please, but they loved how you gave credit to everyone else. They really liked when you talked about the prince and how brave he was. Like I said, you were amazing." The next day, we were invited to Buckingham Palace, and Sarah came along, which surprised me. During this visit, I learned something interesting about her. She was a good friend of the Queen, and they had gone to school together. I also found out her real name was Lady Sarah Smythe because her father was a duke. I got a bit lost as she talked about her family tree. It was too much to follow. The day after that, we began our tour. To keep us safe, the government provided a car with 2 security agents. The protection wasn't optional. It was required for our tour. I thought it was unnecessary, but since Sarah liked having the guards, I didn't complain. Our first stop was Manchester. I had always loved soccer and even played in high school and college. Manchester United was my favorite team. I hoped we could get a quick look at the field before exploring the city. The Manchester club went above and beyond. When they heard I wanted to see the field, they set up a small event at the stadium. My family, Sarah, and I walked onto the field, where I even got to meet a few players. I was overwhelmed by how kind everyone was. Next, we visited Liverpool, and thankfully it was a calm trip. Since our plans weren't made public and the royal family had asked the press to give us space, we enjoyed ourselves without drawing attention. From Liverpool, we continued north, stopping at places Sarah thought would be fun. Being a teacher, she was full of knowledge, which made it even more enjoyable to have her explain the history and importance of each spot we visited. We went to Glasgow and then to Edinburgh, which we decided to make our base. From there, we could take day trips to wherever we wanted. Once again, we were able to move around easily. The initial excitement had faded, and I felt like I was becoming less important. This made me very happy, as I couldn't understand why anyone would want to be famous. During our trip, I realized not only was Sarah an amazing guide, but I was also really drawn to her. My parents and even my in-laws quickly grew fond of Sarah, and the kids adored her. We started as casual friends, but soon we became close. One evening, while Sarah and I were taking a walk, I realized my feelings for her had deepened. We stopped to admire Edinburgh Castle when, on a whim, I leaned in and gave Sarah a gentle kiss. Her surprise quickly turned into a warm embrace, and she kissed me back. We went back to her room, and I wasn't sure what to do next. Thankfully, Sarah had some ideas. She started to help me take off my jacket, and I did the same for her. Once we got comfortable, we settled into her bed. As we lay there looking at each other, Sarah said, "Please don't hurt me." "I'll be very gentle," I replied. "No, that's not what I mean," she said, her eyes showing worry. "I know you care about me, Michael, but I've really developed feelings for you. I'm okay with being close, but if this isn't going anywhere serious, please let me know. It would hurt, but it would be harder if you gave me hope." "Sarah, when Carrie passed away, I thought I wouldn't be able to love anyone again," I said softly. "You've shown me I was wrong. I can't promise everything will be perfect, but I do care for you, and being with you brings me peace." That was everything Sarah wanted to hear. After that, she was full of energy and enthusiasm. Initially, our time together was filled with excitement, and later it turned into sweet moments. At 2 in the morning, I quietly slipped out of bed and back to my room. I didn't want my grandparents to know what Sarah and I had been doing, but I was fooling myself because they greeted me with knowing smiles at breakfast the next day. Before I knew it, the trip ended, and we were back in London. I arranged for my mother to take care of the kids, giving Sarah and me a chance to enjoy our last night together. Saying goodbye was filled with warm embraces and heartfelt emotions. I think Sarah was worried that once I returned home, I would forget her. Not a chance. In the months that followed, I video called her every day and sometimes multiple times a day. The kids loved talking to Sarah because she always had fun stories to share. Finally, I couldn't wait any longer, so I flew back to London and asked Sarah to marry me. She happily said yes. Then we went to meet her father, who I learned was the Duke of Stirling. Sarah's mother had passed away a few years earlier. The Duke of Stirling, who preferred to be called Percy by friends and family, lived in a big old house with large grounds. Sarah mentioned that the farming on the estate covered most of the costs, but not everything. To help out, the Duke opened the family home for tours. The money from these tours helped pay for his needs. "So you want to marry my little Sarah?" the Duke asked with a friendly smile. "Yes, sir, very much," I replied. "You know her brother Edward will get the title and the estate, right?" he asked, seeming to think it was important. "Also, Sarah's title won't be passed down to her children if you have any." "Sir, I really don't mind about Sarah's title," I said with a smile. "I love her and want her to be happy. I know she would be very glad if you gave us your blessing. But either way, if she wants to marry me, I will," the Duke chuckled. "Great answer. I give my blessing with all my love." The wedding was simple, but still more than I had hoped for. Around 100 guests came, including the king and queen. Peter was there with a nice young woman. He was a teenager now and would soon be expected to marry and start a family. My father was my best man, and both of my children were part of the wedding. Sarah and I went on our honeymoon in Bermuda and then returned to Great Britain. We decided to live in England during the school year and in America during the summer. Our children, Grant and Louisa, started school at Ludgrove, a place many royal families chose for their kids. Sarah also took on the role of their mother. While we were in Great Britain, the Queen sometimes asked Sarah and me to help with royal events. This included visiting hospitals, schools, or opening new businesses. Each time we filled in, people greeted us warmly. I must admit I was hesitant at first, but Sarah always made these outings enjoyable, and she found ways to express her appreciation later each time. Whether in Britain or the United States, Peter kept in touch. When he visited the U.S. on official business, he wanted to stay with us, but his security team wouldn't allow it due to safety concerns. Peter had grown from a shy boy into a confident and charming young man, and I couldn't be prouder of him. 2 years after we got married, Sarah had a little boy, and she chose to name him Michael Jr. A year later, we welcomed a girl and named her Charlotte. 18 months after that, another boy arrived, and we named him Thomas after my father. After all the struggles and sadness, my new life felt so different and filled with love. I truly felt grateful. Now, as we get close to our 5th wedding anniversary, we decided to celebrate with dinner and a show. I gave Sarah a gold necklace with 3 heart-shaped charms. Each charm has one of our children's names and birth dates on it. I really hope she likes it. Sarah, I'm trying to finish Michael's journal for him. On our 5th anniversary, we went out for dinner. It was there that Michael gave me the gold necklace that I wear every day. I was so happy and full of love for my husband. I wasn't even thinking about the play that we would see later. My mind was on our time together. As we left the restaurant, I heard someone yelling at me. I turned to see my ex-husband, who was inebriated and holding a weapon. He shouted, "If I can't have you, no one can." Just as he acted, Michael pushed me aside. Instead of injuring me, the shot struck Michael in the chest. I remember just screaming for help. Michael stayed in the hospital for 3 days. I was there with him all that time. On the 3rd evening, when he opened his eyes, I felt so relieved. But he had used his last strength to tell me one more time that he loved me. He passed away shortly after. It's been 2 months since I last wrote in Michael's journal. I thought I could finish it, but I wasn't strong enough. I'm afraid I might need to have it typed since my tears have made the pages messy. I'm still dealing with the loss of Michael. Our children are hurting too, so I must be strong for them. My ex-husband was found guilty of a serious crime and is now in prison. Michael's death deeply affected many people in both Great Britain and the United States. Flags were lowered to half-staff. Since Michael was a veteran, he received full military honors at his funeral in his hometown. To my surprise, the King and Queen came to attend. Peter was there as well. He tried very hard to be brave, but he broke down as they lowered the casket. In a rare moment of emotion from the royal family, the Queen embraced her son as he cried. Now, I am left to put my life back together. It's been very difficult, but Michael gave me one special gift that I hope will help me. At dinner that night, I told my husband that I was expecting again. I had a little girl, and I named her Mary after my mother. She has Michael's eyes and smile. I need to stop now because it's time to feed Mary. All I can do is keep moving forward for my children, knowing that is what Michael would want me to do. I still love and miss him so much. The reason it had been 6 months since my wife of 22 years, Melissa Layton, told me she had fallen in love with someone else and wanted a divorce. The news hit me hard, and I was so surprised that I didn't know how to react. Once I calmed down, I searched the house for her but found that she was gone. Why would she do this? We had 2 kids and, as far as I knew, a happy life together. I felt completely blindsided. I thought maybe Melissa had gone for a walk to think things over and that we could talk when she returned. However, she never came back. She had left everything behind. Her wedding ring, credit cards, cash, insurance cards, and driver's license were all neatly placed on her dresser, along with an envelope. Even her car was still there. I was too nervous to look in the envelope. In fact, I left it in our bedroom and moved into the guest room. It wasn't until about a week later that I finally opened it. What I found was just as bad as I feared. Inside were important documents for our kids and me, along with the divorce papers and a business card for the lawyer who would be handling the situation. The worst part was the smaller envelope that had my name, Mark, written on the outside in Melissa's handwriting. In her note, Melissa explained that she had met someone else and was in love with him. She said she still cared for our girls and me, but felt stronger feelings for this new man. She urged me to sign the divorce papers and not to fight it, saying it would only make things harder for our children and me. Melissa mentioned that she hadn't grown close with this other man yet. That didn't seem to make sense to me. If she cared for him, I thought they would have already shared more. Perhaps she was trying to spare my feelings. But I knew Melissa well. She wasn't someone who would lie. If she wanted to keep something from me, she would simply stay quiet. In her note, Melissa said I didn't know the man and hinted that I shouldn't try to find out who he was for the sake of moving on. She mentioned that he was leaving his own wife and 2 children as well. She said she and her new partner would be going abroad until the divorce was finalized. The note urged me to sign the divorce papers quickly. Melissa didn't ask for any of our shared belongings because she didn't want to hurt me more than she already had. When they eventually came back to the United States, Melissa was clear that she didn't want to see me again. However, if our kids wanted to talk to her, she was open to that. Melissa also mentioned that she was beginning a new life, which was another reason she wasn't taking anything from her old one. She wanted nothing from our marriage. That statement hit me hard, almost as much as finding out that Melissa wanted to separate. I confirmed what she said was true when I looked at the bank accounts and saw her car still in the garage. She had left everything behind, even her clothes. I read the letter again and again, trying to find any hint about why Melissa would make this choice after 22 years of what I thought was a happy marriage. I was 46 years old and in decent shape for my age, though I was maybe 10 pounds overweight. Melissa was 2 years older than me. She was an attractive woman, but not exceptionally so. She was also slightly overweight. Still, it didn't make sense. Why would my wife, who I believed cared for me, hurt me like this? I work as a salesman, and to succeed in my job, you need to be good at talking to people and understanding them. You have to read between the lines, even in written messages. Even though I had not been able to read Melissa well at all, I was still good at what I did. Now I wanted to use some of my skills to figure out why my wife had left her family. I really wanted to see her in person to understand what happened. After all, we had 2 children together. Once I could stop crying, I sat down and made a list of things from the note. First, Melissa's partner was a man. She mentioned this in the letter, but after 22 years of being with her, I knew she was not interested in women. I also believed her partner must be wealthy if he could inspire her to leave everything behind. That meant he would need to buy her a whole new wardrobe, help her with new identification, pay for her lawyer, and possibly even pay for travel. This man must have had a great deal of money. It wasn't much to go on, but I was determined to find out more. I started a list of the richest people in our state, narrowing it down because Melissa said their relationship had been going on for several months. Her letter suggested they had been meeting regularly during that time. I found it hard to imagine any wealthy businessman traveling back and forth just to see her. They would be too busy for that. I also knew my wife hadn't taken any trips recently. I knew my reasoning was weak, but it was the only option I had. After looking into the wealthiest men in the state, I narrowed the list down to a few names. Still, I couldn't be sure which one, if any, was Melissa's companion. So I tried a different approach. I figured they had to meet somewhere close to home. Melissa was always there when I got back from work, so she couldn't venture too far. After checking many restaurants, I found a cafe where she and her companion met several times. Two women I spoke to recognized my wife's photo and described the man. With their help, I had an artist create a sketch of him. By chance, one of my co-workers recognized the man from the image I shared. I likely would have found out who he was eventually, as he was fairly well known in our area. His name turned out to be Conrad Miller, a wealthy philanthropist married to Diane Lindgren. He was on my list of suspects. His business office was in Nashville, and we lived just outside the city. It made some sense. The internet might be full of false information, but it was useful for looking up people. I quickly found details about Conrad and Diane online. I was surprised by what I saw. Conrad was very wealthy, but he didn't look like a typical attractive man. He resembled more of a quiet professor. On the other hand, Diane was quite striking. Even though Melissa was lovely in my eyes, she didn't compare to Diane. Still, Diane could have been unkind, which might have pushed Conrad towards my wife, but that didn't help me understand why it happened. I spent weeks looking into Conrad Miller's business activities. I'm not an expert in finance, but it was clear that Conrad had a wide range of interests. About a third of his businesses were publicly traded, making it easy to find information about them. The remaining two-thirds were privately owned, which made it tough to gather useful details. While I was trying to identify the richest men in the state, an ad for a game caught my eye. It let you pretend to be a day trader. On a whim, I bought it, thinking it might help me understand the man who had taken my wife. While the game didn't aid my search, it was enjoyable and distracting. I learned that successful traders needed to do a lot of research before investing. I became quite interested in the game. After 6 months, I was fairly certain I had figured out who Melissa had been with. Yet I still didn't understand why she had chosen him. These past 6 months had been incredibly lonely. Living in the house that I once shared with Melissa was sometimes hard and sad. To cope, I tried to spend as much time away from home as I could. When I was there, I stayed busy. I started working out by myself and then joined a gym. I pushed myself so much that I would be too tired to think and could sleep at night. I learned to cook and took on small repairs around the house. I completely changed the master bedroom into my own space. Then I signed up for a Taekwondo class. A friend suggested it after he found out my wife had left us. He was right. The martial arts helped me feel balanced. It helped so much that I began going 6 days a week. I wasn't looking to earn a black belt. I just enjoyed the structure and the skills I was learning. I changed my routine, going to the gym in the mornings and attending Taekwondo in the evenings. I got into the best shape of my life. If I couldn't sleep, I would get out of bed and practice my moves for 15 or 20 minutes. This always helped me relax. Another thing I did was revisit my interest in shooting. I had been a paratrooper in the Army for 4 years and really liked it. After marrying Melissa and having our daughters, I sold my guns. But I still enjoyed going to the shooting range sometimes. Now that I was on my own, I could buy a gun again if I wanted. However, that wasn't the main reason I decided to get one and a permit to carry it. A couple of weeks after Melissa left, I came home one evening and noticed small things that seemed off. Living alone, I had gotten used to keeping everything organized, thinking, a place for everything and everything in its place. The first odd thing I saw was the key rack in the kitchen. It was just a board with hooks for my keys. I always put them back in a certain order, but I noticed my spare car key and the front door key were switched. At first, I thought maybe I had mixed them up. But then I saw that other keys, like those for the liquor cabinet and the silverware drawer, were also in the wrong spots. I hadn't used those keys since before Melissa left, but it wasn't just the keys that made me uneasy. I found a book on my nightstand that I had been reading, and it was moved. The bookmark, made by my daughter Carla when she was in 3rd grade, wasn't sticking out as much as usual. It may seem minor, but I always made sure the part that said, "I love Daddy," was visible. That day, I could only see half of my daughter's writing. The more I looked around, the more I noticed small things seemed off. I felt uneasy, like someone had been in my home and tried to cover it up. I wasn't completely sure if my home had been searched, but it made me anxious enough to change the locks and install an alarm system with cameras. I bought the best security I could find, and the company assured me that even the most skilled professionals couldn't get past my system. That's when I decided to go to a shooting range again and take some safety classes. I realized I was becoming a bit paranoid. After spending so many years with Melissa, it felt strange to be alone. My thoughts were all jumbled and nothing seemed clear. I felt like I was missing something important. Or maybe I was just confused because I cared for my wife so much. Then I wondered whether I still loved her. Love can fade if it's not nurtured. That thought was something I would have to face when I saw Melissa again. I also found myself questioning why I didn't just accept the divorce and move forward. The terms were, after all, mostly in my favor. Maybe it was my pride that made me want to have the last word. I pushed those thoughts aside, knowing they wouldn't help me feel better. I guess it's fair to say that I wasn't completely alone. Once people at work heard I had separated from my wife, I caught the attention of several female co-workers. When I started going to the gym and taking martial arts classes, their interest grew even more. I was asked out by women from almost every department. I did go on a few dates, but nothing felt right. My mind was still tangled with thoughts of finding Melissa. After just one date, many women could sense that I wasn't in a place for a serious relationship. I needed to find closure before moving on and possibly meeting someone new. While grappling with my wife's betrayal, I focused on my job. It was a helpful distraction. I was making more money than ever before, had gotten a promotion, and was being considered for a higher position. There was just one problem. I realized I didn't enjoy my job at all. I thought about quitting. I had enough savings to live well for a long time. Instead, I decided to try my hand at day trading. I found a game that allowed me to play as a day trader. I played it for weeks and did pretty well, so I thought I'd give it a real go. At first, I set aside $10,000 to invest. After weeks of making some money but losing even more, I eventually lost the entire $10,000. I invested another $20,000 before I started to understand things. It took a lot of learning, but after spending nearly $40,000, I finally began to make some small profits. I kept going, and unexpectedly, I started earning $5,000 or $10,000 from a single trade. By the time 6 months had passed since my wife left, I decided to quit my job and focus on two things: day trading and finding my wife. My boss and others tried to change my mind, but I told them I no longer wanted to work now that Melissa was gone. I had almost $2 million in total from various places, and day trading made up about 40% of that. The rest came from savings and the value of my house, which was paid off. I also had $400,000 in a retirement account that I could use if needed. I'd face some penalties, but that didn't matter much. After I found out who my wife's new partner was, I learned that he wasn't just wealthy, he was extremely rich. My chances of getting to know him were almost non-existent, and he was always busy. So, I decided to learn more about his wife, Diane, using the internet. Unfortunately, not much was available because she kept a low profile. There were whispers that they were not on good terms, which didn't surprise me. The few pictures that I found were beautiful but not very clear. I did discover that Conrad owned a large home in Tuxedo, New York, where his wife and kids lived, although he rarely spent time there. I learned all this around the time I left my job. Now I was free to move wherever I wanted. All I needed was my laptop, a few clothes, and my new camera with some nice lenses. With these things and a full tank of gas, I could travel. Of course, there were my daughters, Katie and Carla. I didn't worry much about them. Katie was married and living in another state. and Carla was in college far away. She planned to finish her degree this summer and wanted to start her master's in the fall. I stayed in touch with both, and they were strong supporters for me. Unfortunately, they took their mother's departure very hard. Carla was especially upset since she had been very close to her mother. At first, Carla suggested that her mother left because of me. But after weeks without hearing from Melissa, Carla's frustration shifted. Sadly, I didn't help the situation. When she expressed that her mother was like a stranger to her, I didn't stop her. In a way, it made me feel better that Melissa had lost at least one of her daughters, if not both. After a couple of months, Katie started expressing her own frustrations about their mother. By then, I tried to put an end to those discussions, but I wasn't successful. I understood their feelings of betrayal just like mine. I need to apologize. I know my story is a bit scattered, but I hope you can see that my thoughts were all over the place. Going through a divorce feels a lot like losing someone you love. I was going through all the stages of grief. At first, I couldn't accept that Melissa was really gone. Then, I felt anger and tried to negotiate with fate. I prayed late at night, hoping that if Melissa came back to me, I would go to church every Sunday. By the third week, I started to feel really sad, and some of that sadness still lingered. But I hadn't come to terms with my situation yet. I thought I could only do that when I saw Melissa face to face. As I entered the 7th month, several events shook me out of my fog. First, my lawyer called to ask what I wanted to do about the divorce. I hadn't heard from him in months and thought the divorce was already over. I had kind of pushed the divorce out of my mind because I felt helpless. I assumed that since I wouldn't sign the papers, they would just move things along. So it was a surprise to learn that the divorce wasn't finished yet. That was unexpected. The next day, I received calls from Carla and Katie. Their mother had reached out to them. I spoke first to Carla, who was very upset. It took a while to calm her down so she could share what had happened. When Carla realized who it was, she expressed her feelings strongly. She told Melissa that her new relationship better be worth it because, as far as Carla was concerned, her mother was gone from her life. Carla was particularly firm, saying she didn't want her mother at her graduation or wedding. Carla was now engaged. The hardest part was when Carla said that if she had children, Melissa wouldn't see them. Carla said Melissa started to cry, and then the call ended. About a half hour later, I got a call from Katie, who was also very upset but handled it a bit better than her sister. Katie had tried to talk to their mother and find out what she had been doing. However, Melissa refused to share any details. I had been open with my daughters about everything, so they knew about Conrad Miller. Katie, being the calmer of the two, tried to get her mother to open up by telling her that she knew about Conrad. According to Katie, her mother had reacted in shock to the news and tried to deny it. At that moment, Katie lost her patience with her mother and shared as much of their conversation as she could remember. After telling Melissa about Conrad, Katie refused to hear any more excuses from her mother. "Look, Mom, this discussion is useless," Katie said firmly. "You clearly don't care about Carla and me, or you wouldn't have left us. What you did to Dad was hurtful." "Katie, dear, I'm truly sorry," Melissa interrupted. "I love you and your sister, but I had to do this." "Really, Mom?" Katie replied sharply. "You had to hurt Dad like that? Your relationship was so important that you left us behind. You might as well have taken our hearts too, because that's how it feels. In your letter, you said we could reach out if we wanted to. That's just wrong. And for the record, we don't want anything to do with you." At that point, Katie said Melissa started crying, repeating, "I'm so sorry. I still love you all." Then the call ended. Around 3 a.m. the next morning, my phone rang. You know that feeling when you get woken up suddenly? Your heart races and you fear something terrible has happened. I was worried about my daughters. After 2 tries, I finally answered. "Hello? Mark, I'm so sorry. My girls don't want to talk to me." I figured it was Melissa, but I needed to be sure. "Who is this?" I asked. Then the phone went silent. I quickly dialed 69 to get the number that called me back. I called it again, but no one picked up. Later, when I tried that number again, I learned it was no longer in service. However, I found out that the call had come from Tuxedo, New York. It seemed Melissa was back in the U.S. and living with her partner in New York, but that didn't make sense. I knew Conrad had a place there, but it was meant for his wife and kids. Maybe they were away, or perhaps now that Conrad was back, he was spending time with his children. About a month prior, I had found out that Diane lived in that estate with her kids. I attempted to call her, but it didn't work out. I was told that she didn't accept calls from people she didn't know. Knowing I was dealing with wealthy individuals, I realized I needed a different way to reach Diane. The next day, I worked on some trades. By 5 o'clock, I had earned $27,000. Around 11 o'clock that night, I realized I was out of milk, so I decided to do some quick grocery shopping. I had just finished and was heading back to my car when a man suddenly grabbed me from behind. He whispered in my ear, "You need to stop bothering Mr. Miller." At that moment, all my frustration and anger burst out. Drawing on my self-defense training, I quickly turned, kicking him in the knee and twisting his wrist behind his back. "Who are you?" I asked, looking down at the man who was now on his knees. He appeared to be in his 30s and fit, but he couldn't move. I had him in a hold where I could easily subdue him, and he didn't seem like a typical mugger, though he looked well prepared. "You're making a big mistake," he replied through clenched teeth. Then I felt something cool pressed against my head. "Let him go," a voice ordered. But I didn't let him go. Instead, I contemplated how to handle the situation. This was a negotiation. "I think we are at a standstill here," I said quietly. "You can choose to act, but I can make sure your associate won't go far. The noise will attract attention." The man paused, and I decided to bluff. "Also, I have a hidden microphone. What we're discussing is being recorded. You wouldn't have time to find it before others arrive. When they do, it could lead to complications for your associate." "Okay," the man finally said. "What do you want to do?" "To start, take 2 steps back," I replied, trying to stay calm. "You can keep your weapon directed at me. Once you've done that, I will help your friend up. He will face you and provide a barrier. I understand you were instructed to caution me regarding Mr. Miller. Consider that caution delivered. Then you can leave. When I feel secure, I'll let your associate go." "Fine," the man agreed. "We were told to just warn you, not to harm you this time." "Good," I said, working hard to keep my relief from showing. "Now step back 2 steps." I heard him move back. I slowly helped the other man up from the ground. His expression showed anger, indicating he was still a threat. "Listen," I whispered to him. "I can make this uncomfortable for you. In fact, I can act before your associate can react. But I think we can keep everything straightforward, right?" I tightened my hold slightly, and he gasped, nodding his head in response. "Now you turn and start walking away," I instructed the other man. Reluctantly, he did what I asked. When he was about 50 feet away, he turned around to look at me. "You said you'd let him go," the man said firmly. "I will, but only after you're far enough away. I'm not the one who initiated this." The man turned and walked further away. When he reached about 75 feet, I let the man go and nudged him toward his friend. Instead of following, the man I had held turned to look back at me. "You've been warned. Stay away from Mr. Miller." At that moment, I pulled out my gun and pointed it toward him. "You tell your boss. I don't care about him. If he wants to keep his secrets safe, he should just leave me alone." When I suddenly showed my gun, the man looked very surprised. It seemed he hadn't expected me to be armed. I thought about following the 2 men, but I realized they would notice if I tried to track their car. Even if I managed to catch a license plate, it wouldn't help me find Conrad. No, I needed to think and figure out a plan. Clearly, I had stirred up trouble, but I wasn't sure why things had escalated this way. I collected my groceries from the parking lot and headed home. I grabbed the key from the board and opened the liquor cabinet. I don't drink often, but tonight I really needed one. Once I calmed down, I sat at the kitchen table to write down everything I knew, hoping to create a plan. First off, Conrad Miller was definitely the man Melissa had left with, but I couldn't stop wondering why. Conrad's wife was very attractive, and I had read that she was kind and generous. Why would someone so successful choose my wife over this lovely woman? Maybe there was more to Diane than it seemed, but if that were true, the media would have reported it. They love to expose the flaws of famous people. I came to the conclusion that Conrad was likely upset because my daughter Katie had mentioned we knew he was the one Melissa had run off with. Plus, my call to his wife a month ago probably didn't help. At one point, I considered if Melissa had been in witness protection. That could explain why she left so suddenly. But if that were true, why wouldn't she take the girls with her? Surely they would still be in danger. After tonight, though, I dismissed that idea. Those men didn't seem like trained agents. Federal marshals wouldn't threaten people, or at least I thought they wouldn't. But they had been careless, and I had managed to take one of them down without too much trouble. Even with almost 6 months of training in martial arts, I shouldn't have been able to accomplish that. The more I thought about it, the more I believed that these men worked for Conrad Miller. This made me wonder two things. Why did Conrad want to keep me away from Melissa? And why did Melissa leave without talking to me about what she intended to do? These questions kept circling in my mind. I began thinking about Melissa before we started dating. She was 26 when we got married. I knew she had worked as a bookkeeper after she finished school. She lived with her parents for a time, and then had her own apartment for a few years before we got married. Tragically, her parents had died in a fire before we began our relationship. Because of the loss of her family home, she lost many reminders of her early life. I realized I didn't know much about her past before we met. Then there was the issue of Melissa's cell phone. She insisted on having a separate phone plan from mine and the kids. Even though a family plan would have been cheaper, she preferred having her own plan and had the bills sent straight to her. I never saw any statements, and I couldn't find any copies of her phone bills at home. Since she left, this setup had been on my mind. When I learned about Conrad Miller and that the divorce wasn't finalized, I devised a clever way to get copies of Melissa's phone bills. I asked to meet with her divorce lawyer, pretending to want to discuss the final divorce settlement. I told him I needed to see all the paperwork before making any decisions. He agreed, and all the documents were laid out for me to review. I had my briefcase open in front of me as I went through them, and I was especially interested in the general power of attorney. This was the document Melissa had given to her lawyer to handle everything. While looking it over, I took pictures with a small, high-quality camera. After taking all the photos, I told the lawyer I would think about my next steps and reach out later. At home, I transferred the pictures of the power of attorney onto my computer. I used some software I had bought online to reformat the document, making it look like a genuine copy. The only change I made was to list my name as having this power. I knew my altered power of attorney might raise suspicions. Still, I believed it would be enough when I showed it to a clerk at one of the cell phone providers' stores. However, they threw me a curveball that could have ruined my plan. They asked for Melissa's password. That caught me off guard for a moment. I remembered seeing Melissa type her password into her computer one time. She didn't know I was behind her, so I didn't want to interrupt her. The password was just a mix of our daughter's birth dates. It was the only password of hers I knew, so I took a chance and tried it. Thankfully, it worked, and I discovered two important things. First, Melissa had canceled her cell phone shortly after she left me. Second, I got the last year of phone statements before she left. Once home, I looked through the statements and figured out most of the calls were regular ones. However, I noticed that once a month, Melissa called a number in Nashville up until about 4 months before she left. She made this call on the same day and time each month. There was nothing strange about her calling someone in Nashville since we lived nearby, but calling on the same day each month raised my curiosity. As time went on, the calls became more frequent before her disappearance. The day before she left, she made 5 calls to that number. The last call was right before I got home that day. Realizing Melissa was calling someone else made my anger rise, but then I hesitated. If she had started seeing someone months before, why did she only call once a month for 8 months straight? And why were the calls always at the same time? The sudden increase in calls only left me with more questions. I tried calling the number, but it was disconnected. I had hoped for answers, but the phone records turned out to be another dead end. I felt so frustrated that I thought about just signing the divorce papers and moving on. But deep down, I knew I wouldn't find peace if I did that. I needed to know the truth. After a tense moment in a parking lot that night, I realized the last piece of the puzzle was the estate in Tuxedo, New York. So I packed my things and drove the long trip to New York. I had only the barest plan in mind, which worried me. As I drove, I tried to think of a better plan, but nothing came to me. I was also anxious because I had my firearm with me, and New York didn't recognize my permit for it. It's ironic that New York has strict gun laws but also high crime rates. When I arrived in Tuxedo, I checked into a motel. I wanted to pay in cash, but they insisted on a credit card. We worked something out, and I let them run my card with the promise that they wouldn't charge it unless absolutely necessary. I told them I was staying away from my wife until our divorce was complete. They seemed understanding. Next, I explored the estate. It was large, and only a small part was visible from the road. A tall wall surrounded the property, keeping people from seeing in. There seemed to be guards at the front gate. They were mostly hidden, but I spotted 3 men just inside with my camera. I took a few pictures of each guard. When I looked at them closely, I noticed something surprising. One of the guards was a man I had dealt with that night in the parking lot. I was sure I was in the right place. I just needed a way to get inside or see what was happening inside. While I was watching, 2 moving trucks arrived, and I felt a pang of worry. If they were planning to leave, I might never find them again. However, one of the guards spoke to the drivers, and a few minutes later the trucks drove off. Still, I felt certain they would return. I was eager to get into that house, but I wasn't a secret agent with fancy tools. I thought hard about how to get inside. Most of my ideas seemed silly. The estate took up an entire block, so I slowly drove around, avoiding the front gate. I took side streets and then circled back. On my 3rd round, I noticed something. A big tree had a couple of branches reaching slightly over the wall in the northwest corner. It was a risky idea, but it was my only option. I used my phone to find the nearest hardware store. Thankfully, there was one less than half a mile away. I hurried to the store and bought a collapsible ladder and some rope. On my way back, I was glad I had chosen a Range Rover as my car. If I had taken Melissa's smaller car, I wouldn't have fit the ladder inside. Once back, I carefully approached the tree, making sure no one was around. I hid the ladder and rope in some bushes and parked my car less than a block away, just in case I needed to leave quickly. With my camera around my neck, I walked back to the tree. After checking that no one was nearby, I set up the ladder against the wall. I quickly climbed up into the tree, then pushed the ladder aside. I didn't want any curious neighbors to see it leaning there. If I needed to leave fast, I planned to use the rope. What struck me as funny about my situation was that I wouldn't have been able to climb into the tree 7 months ago. Now, after all my exercising, it was easy. I climbed higher into the tree until I could see the whole backyard clearly. It was big and beautifully arranged. There was a patio with a shiny grill, outdoor furniture, and a TV on the wall. But the main attraction was a large, oval-shaped swimming pool with a waterfall and a slide. Yet that wasn't what caught my eye. I couldn't believe it. Laying on a lounge chair reading a book was Diane Lindgren. She looked even prettier in real life. Then I saw the sliding glass door open and a man stepped out. He stayed in the shadows for a few moments, so I couldn't see who he was. Finally, he walked over to Diane and embraced her gently. I was completely shocked to see it was Conrad Miller. This was unbelievable. He was with my wife and was still married to his own. Suddenly, I heard some noise coming from inside the house. 2 men with guns told the couple to go back inside. I had no idea what was happening, but it felt very wrong. I took out my phone and called 911. I told the operator to send police because there had been a shooting. I wasn't sure if there had been one, but I had a feeling there would be. I quickly tied off the rope and threw it down. It took just seconds to climb down, and then I ran for the house. As I crossed the lawn, I expected to hear gunfire, but it didn't happen. When I reached the sliding glass door, I found it was still open. Quietly, I slipped inside and moved toward the voices I heard. Peeking into a large living room, I spotted 7 people. I didn't know 4 of them, but I recognized the other 3, and my heart sank when I saw one of them was Melissa. Melissa was sitting on a couch beside Diane, with her husband on the other side. "Please, Gino," Conrad begged. "Let the women go. I'm the one who took the money. I can get it all back for you and more." "It's not just about the money," a short man with a mean smile replied. "It's about honor. You stole from us. That was bad enough. But that woman got my brother Johnny sent to prison for 20 years. I felt sick when I saw Gino aim his gun at my wife." "Gino, she didn't do it. I did," Diane said bravely. "I used her computer to send all the important information to the government. She didn't have anything to do with it." "But she helped gather the information," Gino replied. Besides, it doesn't matter. She knows too much, and I won't leave any loose ends. Since you're going to hurt us anyway, Conrad said, can I ask a few questions? Why not? Geno said with a sneer. I've got a few minutes. I sent one of my men to check if I was right. What do you mean? Conrad asked. Geno laughed a little. I was surprised when you and your bookkeeper showed up last night. We've been watching this place for weeks. I thought your wife would lead us to you. But then you came back here. There had to be a reason for that. You could have just met your wife somewhere else. There's something here that you wanted and she couldn't get it for you. Just then, another man came into the room. You were right, Geno, he said happily. I found a safe hidden in the floor. I thought so, Geno said, smiling more as he turned to Conrad. Your problem was caring for your wife too deeply. You tried to protect her from what you were doing. You should have trusted her with the combination. But it wouldn't have changed things. We were going to follow her anyway, and she would have brought us to you. Conrad glanced at his wife and sighed sadly. Then he looked back at Geno. But why go after Melissa? She was just a bookkeeper. She was your personal bookkeeper, Geno said. You treated her more like family than an employee. I thought she would know where your money was and how to get to it. I also figured she would know every property you owned, giving us places to look for you. I believed you would use those properties. But how did you find out we told on your brother? Diane asked. You were clever about how you shared the information with the authorities, Geno admitted. Even your husband didn't know you were the informant at first. Still, it took years and a lot of money to get our people to find the real source of the information. I must say, Geno chuckled again, what are you calling yourself these days? Conrad Miller? That was smart. You and your wife had surgery and then came back in plain sight as new billionaires. But really, most of that wealth is just a show you created to appear richer than you are. I knew you hadn't stolen $1 billion. What did you get? 40 or 50 million? 78 million, Conrad corrected him. That much, Geno nodded. I'm impressed. But you were always the clever one, Jacob, and that's why my brother brought you in. You took our illegal money and turned it into honest businesses. Your mistake was being greedy. You took so much money and hid it in businesses we didn't know about. But Johnny finally caught on to what you were doing. He was ready to get rid of you when your wife alerted the authorities. I must admit that surprised me for a long time. I accidentally found out about your bookkeeper. I had planned to take her and her family. My intention was to frighten them until she provided you up. I would have let her go last, but then she vanished. This made me realize there was a traitor in my group. It didn't take long for me to figure out it was Kelly, and I had to deal with her. Kelly's gone? Conrad asked, looking shocked and saddened. Yes, but it wasn't my doing. She tried to escape from us and fell from a window. Sadly, she didn't survive, so we couldn't question her. Once your bookkeeper ran away, I figured it was pointless to go after her family without knowing her location. So, we listened in on their phones. After many months, that's how we found out your real names and where you were. If you knew we were here, why didn't you take us last night? Conrad asked. Geno shook his head. I think I overthought things. While watching this house, I thought you'd need new IDs. I figured out which ones you were using and stopped their delivery. My plan was to replace the drivers in the moving vans with my people, but since you didn't get those IDs, you sent the vans away. That's when I chose to make my move. And here we are. Enough talking. We can do this simply or roughly. I need the combination to the safe. If you don't give it to me, I'll take your bookkeeper first, then your wife, and lastly you. Or I'll just open the safe myself. As I stayed hidden, everything clicked into place. But what should I do? I realized I had only one choice. Geno, I used to think your brother was the worst, Conrad said angrily, but you've proven me wrong. I'll take that as a compliment, Geno replied with a laugh. Don't worry, I'll tell Johnny you said hi. Now it's time to wrap this up. All the months of anger and sadness faded away. I was still terrified, but I knew I needed to act. I quickly remembered the lessons I'd learned about handling firearms. Then I checked my gun to make sure it was ready. Finally, I aimed at Geno. My teacher had told me to deal with the biggest threat first. I knew I only had a few seconds to take my shots, so I had to make them count. After taking a small breath, I pulled the trigger. I hit Geno in the back, and he fell forward. Then I shot the man aiming at Melissa, and he went down. I fired again, hitting the third man before they started firing back. One of their shots hit me on my side, but I kept shooting. I managed to take down the fourth and fifth men, but I had been hit again. I felt a sharp pain in my left shoulder. I realized blood was dripping down my face. I must have been hit earlier. I stood there looking at Melissa, but I couldn't find my voice. Her eyes were wide with concern as she stepped closer to me. I remember hearing police sirens before everything turned black. When I awoke, I was in a hospital. It was dark outside and the room was quiet except for some machines around me. I noticed my hands were tied to the bed. I felt pain, so I pressed the button for the nurse. To my surprise, Melissa rushed in with a police officer. "Mark," she said, clearly worried. "Are you okay?" "I just hurt," I replied softly. I was hoping for something to ease the pain. A nurse entered just then with a syringe. She connected it to an IV and gave me some medicine. Soon, the pain started to fade. Melissa sat by my side while the officer stood at the end of the bed. "Oh, Mark," Melissa cried. "I'm so sorry for everything. I didn't know what else to do. I was scared of what Johnny and Gino might do to you and the girls. I wanted to keep you all safe." I hoped Conrad could help us, but he was just as afraid. He convinced me that the only way to protect you was to say I found someone else and that I wanted a divorce. It broke my heart when I saw the pain in your eyes that day. Tears streamed down her face. I took her hand in mine. "You did it to protect us. It hurt a lot. I spent so much time wondering why you left. I thought you were gone for good and I needed answers. I'm sorry. I think I might have led Gino to you and Conrad." "No, Mark. It wasn't your fault," she said through her tears. "It was all on me. I missed my family so much that I reached out to you all, even when Conrad told me not to. When I learned how much the girls were hurting, I felt terrible. I couldn't even let you know what was happening. Conrad was working hard to get us new identities and find a safe place. The moving trucks were ready, but we still didn't have new papers. I thought I might not make it, but at least I hoped my family would be okay." At that moment, the pain medicine took effect. I don't know how long I had been out, but when I opened my eyes again, the sun was shining. Melissa was sleeping in the chair next to me, still holding my hand. My arm was bandaged and sore, but my side hurt a bit more. Still, it wasn't too bad, so I decided to try to sit up in bed. If you've ever been in a hospital bed, you know they are very uncomfortable. It was even harder for me since one of my hands was tied to the bed. When I tried to sit up, Melissa jumped up from her chair, her face showing worry. "What are you doing?" "I'm just trying to feel a little better," I replied with a faint smile. She helped adjust my position until I was a bit more comfortable. Then she smiled at me warmly, and I felt a rush of happiness. "I truly love you," she whispered softly. "Can you forgive me for what I did?" "Melissa, it's clear that I still love you," I said. I'll admit there were times when people told me to just move on, and I did think about signing the divorce papers. But after being married for 22 years, I couldn't do that without understanding why. I had my doubts, thinking you might have moved on with someone else, but it never felt right to just let go. Until I knew for sure that you didn't love me anymore, I couldn't give up. "Oh, what did I do to deserve you?" Melissa said, starting to cry again. Once she calmed down, I told her to take the key to my motel room. She looked worn out, so I suggested she take a shower and get some rest. She agreed, but getting the officer to let her have my motel key was a challenge. Eventually, a call to his boss helped me get the key. I then learned that the district attorney was considering charging me for having an illegal gun. It felt unfair. I had helped take down a big crime group, and they were upset because I didn't have a permit. It just didn't sit right. After she left, I asked the nurse if she could help me get my cell phone from my pants. That turned into quite the discussion because the police had taken it. They finally let me use the hospital phone, and luckily, I remembered both my daughter's numbers. I called Katie and Carla and told them everything. I saved the fact that I was in the hospital for last, which really shocked them. They insisted they were coming to see me. Once they found out what their mother had been going through, both girls were deeply upset about their earlier treatment of Melissa. I told them not to be too hard on themselves because I would have reacted similarly if I had the chance. 10 hours later, Katie arrived at the hospital. She had caught a flight to LaGuardia and rented a car. She looked pale when she walked in. Melissa was out getting coffee. "Oh, Daddy, are you going to be okay?" she asked softly as she hugged me gently. "The doctors say I'm going to be fine," I reassured her. "In fact, they're releasing me tomorrow. By then, the district attorney had decided not to charge me. However, we agreed to be available at our own cost if they needed us to testify. A few minutes later, Melissa came back into the room. I hadn't told her that the girls were coming. I'm not sure why. Maybe I worried she might feel uneasy again about what the girls had said. They looked at each other for a while before Katie ran to her mom, and they embraced. I could only hear them expressing their remorse. 4 hours later, Carla arrived, and the whole scene unfolded again. Soon, the three of them were gathered around my bed, offering their support. Finally, the nurse came and assisted me in walking around. My wife and 2 daughters stayed close by. At that moment, I couldn't hold back my tears. It took just over 6 months, but I went from a broken marriage to a relationship that is stronger and more loving than ever before. Epilogue. In the weeks after the incident, I found out that Gino died at the scene along with 2 of his men. The other 2 survived surgery and now face serious charges. They will likely spend their lives in prison. Gino's brother Johnny was also involved, so he was charged as well. All 3 of Conrad's guards died. I never got the 15 minutes of fame, thank goodness. My name was not shared with the media, and neither was Melissa's. Even though Gino and Johnny would stay in jail, I worried about any influence they might still have. The FBI assured me that their group had been completely broken apart. In fact, Conrad Miller and Diane Lindgren agreed to help the government. They were revealing parts of the criminal organization that the authorities didn't know about yet. In the end, we were not called to testify. Still, I know that the FBI can't always be trusted, so I made sure our names were kept private. I even got a court order to seal those records. I realize if the government wants to uncover them, they likely can. But hopefully, no one will be interested. Conrad and Diane received community service as part of their deal. They also had to give back the money they made illegally. Much of that money was in digital currency, and the access information was locked away. However, it seems they must have had some valuable information for such a light sentence. I also found out their 2 children were staying with a nanny in Florida. Interestingly, after completing their community service, Conrad and Diane left the United States. I suspect they didn't give up all of their money. The government couldn't do anything because they had vanished. About a year later, we got a postcard from Spain. It simply read, "We're sorry for everything. Thank you." Having Melissa back home was an adjustment for both of us. I still felt hurt because she had gone away. I understood the reasons behind it, but it didn't make the pain go away. Meanwhile, Melissa was having troubling dreams. Some nights she would wake up upset. People may have different opinions about therapy, but it really helped us. Coming back home was surprising for Melissa. Things had changed a lot while she was away. I had finally taken care of repairs that I had put off for a long time. The house was painted a new color, and our bedroom was completely changed. Melissa had to get used to the fact that I didn't go to an office anymore. Well, that's not quite right. I now work from my study on day trades. Because I set my own hours, I enjoy spontaneous vacations with Melissa. She loved that. Melissa was impressed with how fit I looked and decided to join me at the gym in the morning. However, she didn't want to try Taekwondo. We don't go every day anymore. Now we go to the gym 3 times a week, and I practice Taekwondo twice a week. Our relationship grew stronger. We both realized that we should value every moment we have together. Carla is getting married in 3 months, and Melissa is busy with the wedding plans. Katie is expecting a baby and already knows it's going to be a boy. Both of the girls call us nearly every day to check in. Carla stayed with us for the first few weeks I was home. Since I was still sensitive, I chose to sleep in the guest room. Each night, I'd hear my bedroom door open and hear Carla checking in. I knew she was just being supportive. I was relieved when Carla finally returned to her apartment. I appreciated her concern, but I didn't want to feel like I had another partner. Melissa and I already care for each other a lot. When we started sharing a bed again, I'd wake up when I felt her presence, wanting to ensure she felt secure and appreciated. I'm not embarrassed to say I did the same. In the beginning, I really needed to understand why my wife had left. Now I see. She left because she loved me. Hey, audience! If you like this video and want to keep up with more thrilling stories, make sure to subscribe to Prince Cheating Tales and hit the notification bell. You don't want to miss out on our upcoming adventures. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next wonderful story.